You're listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast. We're an independent, general interest bookstore putting great reads in the hands of people in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Hosted by resident Skylighters, we're here to bring you new and exciting author conversations, group reads, and bookseller chats. Happy listening.
Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome to SKYLIT. This is the SKYLIT Books podcast, and I'm your host, Hallie. Today, we're welcoming Kyra Simone to discuss her book, Palace of Rebel, and Emmalea Russo to discuss her book, Confetti. Before I introduce them to you, I just want to remind you that SKYLIT Books is open from 10 to 10 every day in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, and we ship nationwide from skylitbooks.com. Kyra Simone is a Tunisian-American writer from Los Angeles, now based in Brooklyn. Her fiction and poetry have appeared in a variety of literary journals, including The Baffler, The Brooklyn Rail, Bomb, Conjunctions, The Denver Quarterly, The Anthology of Best American Experimental Writing, and elsewhere. The recent winner of the inaugural ILS Fence magazine fiction contest, Simone is a member of the publishing collective Ugly Duckling Press and part of a two-woman team running the editorial office of Zone Books. Her debut story collection, Palace of Rebel, is out now from Tenement Press, and she is at work on a novel. Emmalea Russo is a writer, editor, and bookseller living at the Jersey Shore. Her books of poetry are G, Wave Archive, and Confetti. Recent poems and essays on film and visual art have appeared in Art Forum, American Chordata, Bomb, the Brooklyn Rail, Compact, Granta, Gulf Coast, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. She edits the multidisciplinary journal Asphalt Magazine and blogs on Substack. Currently, she is at work on a series of books on cinema, mysticism, and spectatorship. The first, Confetti, is out from Hyperidian Press, and the second, Magenta, is forthcoming from Hiding Press in 2023. Welcome, Kyra and Emmalea. I'm so happy to have you.
Thanks. Thanks, Hallie.
We are going to start with readings by both writers. So yeah, let's kick it off.
Okay, hi, thanks. Thanks for that intro. So I'm Emmalea, and my book, Confetti, is sort of arranged in a few sections, and I'm going to read from the first section, which is called Light. And I'll start with two poems, both kind of California-y. In Hollywood. At the start of fire season, I yelled into the eye of a suspended possum to X out a madness. Beheld deficient rain, cherry vanilla seltzer fizzing, faux snow seeming to dive at the grove in illumined flurries, like the hair of an animal technically feral. Unquantifiable Venice Beach trash inflates near a couple stabbing French toast, hotel water fountaining over a man selling 4 pairs of dress shoes on a keyboard, spider balancing on palm frond, slants away from light as cement white of this building mutes, small dog gallops into fat droplets of rain for 3 minutes. In Hollywood. He loses his job at Sunglass Hut. 7 wide-brimmed hats and 2 plants for sale. Playing the keyboard, 2 velour swivel chairs, blood clomping metallic through a vein. She broke down and let me in, playing at the cafe. Strangers encircle me and they sing and sing until a maniacal laughter about which there's something French and familiarly lit. And I run to the sea, and a stranger remains with me, and all across the nation, such a strange vibration, quick synaptic vigor, prayers for the dead, Californian liturgical glance. I'm accidentally smiling at him, so I do it again. I'm smiling at him, so I do it more, but I have to go to get set up with the spirit in the sky. Strange vibration of the stranger in my throat, urging now to consume more light or whatever will desiccate. Where the sky makes dots of paper, the moth's antenna stirs vanishing metal, linoleum floor flecked purple, orange, white, enter a rhythm whose center partially digests light.
Thanks, Emily. And now we'll hear a little bit from Kyra from Palace of Rubble.
Hey guys. I just realized that I was on mute when you said hello before because there was a truck going by because I live in New York, and I'm actually going to read a piece that's a little more New York oriented. So Palace of Rubble is a book of what I'm calling stories, but they're each around 1 to 2 pages long, and could easily be thought of as prose poems or flash fiction. They sort of straddle the line between the two. And I think the only thing you need to know is that each piece is composed primarily of single words that are extracted from the newspaper. So they're sort of built from the shards of the daily news. And this first piece I'm going to read is called Dear Pauline. She sits on a metal folding chair on the roof, smoking in her slip. A magnificent creature with short black hair slicked back away from her face and a pair of neat pearls nestled in her earlobes. An old television flickers on a crooked patch of the roof, plugged into a long cord cast out from an open window. The woman watches it as she smokes, reading the title cards that appear between the images, sensational white lettering against the black background of a silent picture. Earlier in the day, she sat by the window, gazing out at the backsides of the surrounding buildings, a jungle of wrecked yards scattered with brick. She watched the rainfall on a white mattress abandoned in a parking lot, there for weeks, along with a pair of shoes thrown out on the asphalt and the kids dangling from the fire escapes, using them as basketball hoops. Tart-tongued and handsome, she has been answering letters all afternoon, trying to escape the weepy Victorian past by advising lonely hearts to leave their rooms, housewives to abandon their cards at the table. Her own husband wrote a letter to the paper once himself, telling of how she eats breakfast naked and cooks naked and routinely falls asleep early in the evening, still in the buff. He often stays up late, catching sight of strange things that only happen at this hour, like the men digging in the yard in the middle of the night. She can hear him typing away as she falls asleep, both of them just silhouettes to each other on either side of the curtain hanging between the adjoining rooms. But tonight, she has kept herself up to see the eclipse, a rare blood moon that is said to rise at midnight, casting a dim red light over the city. She hasn't been on the roof in months, not since her 30th birthday, when she stood with a crown of white roses wilting from her head as cockroaches ran across the tarred ridges. It was only November then, and as they raised their glasses, the first snow began to fall, a gentle flurry that felt fine against their skin. It has been a long winter, followed by a dark spring. Hungry rats have gnawed at the bark of trees. Houseplants have frozen in blocks of ice. The cold days have been spent conversing with the paintings along the hall, pictures of marauders waiting in the dark to have their way with her. A century ago, no one had ever seen a moon like this. But now, as the tables are set with unleavened bread, the doors marked with simulated lamb's blood, it appears in the sky, burnt orange red, sliding into the earth's shadow and shining with the light of every sunrise and sunset that has occurred across the planet through the day. Off the coast of an eastern country, a boat full of school children disappears into the sea. A plane goes missing in the Australian Ocean. A hot air balloon goes down in flames just after it takes off. The people on the roof remove their clothes and begin to dance, the man having emerged from the window that leads back into the apartment, looking up at the light bleeding from the edges of the moon. In the middle of Metropolis, there is a strange house, overlooked by the centuries, say the words across the screen. When the color is gone from the sky, what is left appears black.
Thank you so much. I'd like to start, well, first I have a new standard for poems, which is now if the grove doesn't come into a poem, I don't want to hear it. So thanks, Emily. I would love for us to start for y'all to just tell us a little bit about your books. They're both a bit experimental in form and have images. And I'd just like to hear, or for our listeners to know what we're getting into.
Well, Confetti is a book of poems, I guess, in a sense. There's like straight up poems in here, but it's also arranged into 7 sections that are sort of loosely they each have a sort of environment of their own, and they're all kind of dealing with the sort of creation of images and the process of looking at images, specifically moving images like movies, but also the sun and the moon and things like that. The section that I read from, the first section called Light, the like sort of themes running through there are sort of having to do with strange, like eerie kinds of light and the way that light plays on environments. So, and the movie The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like a major theme running through that first section. So there's like some Leatherface references, and in addition to that, there's also running through the I almost said running through the film, running through the book, these, well, I guess what I call diagrams, which are kind of drawings-ish of various paused moments in movies, and there are like many different ones. So they sort of get dispersed throughout the book. My friend had a good description of it. He said something like they sort of float to the top as like a filminess on top of like a liquid or something, which I like, because there's also some like grossness and like some like grotesqueness in the book as well. Hopefully that answers.
So I explained a little bit about it right before I read that piece, so Palace of Rubble is a collection of stories that started a long time ago. It was initially inspired by a photograph on the cover of a newspaper, the New York Times, which I found on a table unopened, and it was an image of one of Saddam Hussein's palaces that had been demolished during the fall of Baghdad in 2003. And at the time, I was taking a class on recent innovative fiction and was learning about writing under constraints, and the Oulipo group, which is a lot of people know about, but if you don't, it's a group of writers and mathematicians that was founded in the 1960s, and they would try to create texts that had some sort of mathematical formula behind them. And so I was learning about that. I was reading a lot of Oulipian work and seeing this image and coming across this newspaper by chance. I had this idea to, what if I tried to create a story just using the words that were on the front cover of this newspaper, and so that, and beneath that image it said Palace of Rubble. That was the caption to the photograph, and so that's where the first story in there's a title story in the book called Palace of Rubble, and that's where that first started. And then I kind of took off running with the idea, and over years continued to write these pieces using that constraint. So that's sort of where it started, and then it kind of evolved from there. And I definitely, I was more strict in the beginning about using the constraint, and then it sort of expands, and there's definitely a little bit of cheating here and there. And thematically, I would say the book sort of describes a post-apocalyptic world that's kind of a parallel universe to the one we're in right now, apparently. And so it takes fragments of what's going on in current events, and it restructures them into something totally different. It at times is sort of fabulous and surreal. There's also imagery. There's photographs by the photographer John Davola, who came to the project later. So the images weren't originally in this book. But when I started working with the publisher to turn this into an actual book, it was actually his idea. He had worked with John Davola before, and it was his idea to include images. Although I had always thought that this book would work well with images. I had originally thought of collage of some kind, maybe being something that would pair well, since the texts themselves are almost like collages. But John Davola's work ended up being, I feel, the perfect thing to pair it with. The images in this book draw from a series he did called Vandalism. And they're all images of these vacant buildings along the California coast that he sort of infiltrated and would manipulate really subtly, like throwing a plastic bag up in the air and photographing that within the space, or taking a spray paint and writing a single word on a wall, or just very small things. And they're photographs from the 70s. So they've been around for a while, but being from California and having spent a lot of time in derelict spaces and sort of making palaces out of them, I felt like it really connected to the work. And that's sort of one of the themes of the book, is this finding beauty in the ruins, sort of. So I'll stop there for now.
I didn't realize the pictures were from the 70s, which adds another layer of like decay and time or like over time. And decay and grossness are both something that you explore in your books. Can you talk a little bit about why you're drawn to that?
Why are you drawn to decay and grossness?
Why are you gross?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are sort of present in both of our books. I mean, just to kind of like go off of what Kyra was just saying, there's a lot of in Confetti, a lot of like sort of changing it sort of deals with the changing relationships to screens and the kind of slow way the screen sort of seems to encompass everything now. So there are like moments when the speaker or the you in the text like seems to sort of merge with the screen in a sense. But also there's like along with that, and I guess another like side note connection between our books would be that the 70s, is like running through mine as well. And I think that this is also like something about the sort of switch in America from industrial to financial capitalism, and like this sort of like image of something like a steel mill, which occurs throughout Confetti, kind of becoming something derelict, and then the kind of like displacement or airiness or dispersion that comes like in a kind of post-industrial landscape, if that makes sense. So I think that's sort of why I was drawn to it. I mean, I grew up in a town that's very much like kind of post-industry and in the shadow of various mills. So they were just sort of around. And so like the sort of idea of confetti becomes almost like an extended metaphor for, I don't know, like what can like sort of fly high in a sense, but also like land everywhere. So it gets very high and it gets very low, and it doesn't like discriminate, like there's a lot of gross stuff on the ground. So it sort of becomes this like material that gets places that you may or may not want to look. So I don't know if mine's like trying to find beauty necessarily in the decay, like you said yours is doing, Kyra, which is really cool. I think mine's something like about something more about like the kind of violence of this sort of change, or the sort of like freedom of like feeling kind of uprooted and like dispersed, and also the sort of like terror that comes with that.
Yeah, and if you walk into a room and there's confetti on the ground but no people, you know that there was a party that is over.
As a kind of after the party
yeah,
vibe.
it's like quite a literal passage of time marker. So that's really
yeah.
cool. Thanks.
And like this is like neither here nor there maybe, but they used to use like plums and fruit as like confetti, and so like the paper that we use now is kind of like this more disposable or something, lighter offshoot of that.
Wow, I didn't know that the smell would be a lot different with the rotting plums on the ground.
Yeah. Also getting like pummeled with fruit or something.
Yeah,
it's a bit odd.
It would be a different vibe at kids' birthday parties, for sure. I guess I'll just say most of the stories in my book in Palace of Rebel are about something that's falling apart. So I guess it's decay in that sense, but trying to find a way to live within it. And it also sort of looks at the myth of America as a utopia of sorts, pulls from concrete things that are being reported, and tries to sort of see between the lines and pull out what's between the cracks, and I don't know that I set out with like a fascination with decay, but I feel like we're living in a world that's in decay, in more ways than one, not just environmentally, but pedagogically kind of. And so I was just sort of engaging with that reality. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. But.
I think also like for both of our books, a word that comes to mind, or I don't know, I don't want to like speak for your book here, but like when I read your book, this kind of comes to mind too. And I think I was thinking about this word, decadence, which like means decay or like refers to a fall or a decay. And so I think a lot of what I see in both of the sort of another overlap in both of our books is like this like decoration or weird like floridness from something fucked up or broken, whether or not that's beautiful, like the readers shall decide. But
there's a Marie Antoinette vibe, I think, to both of them in weird ways of like, I don't know, I have a story where there's like the story where there's a bunch of people like dancing at the top of a tower that's actually sinking into the ground, and I think the confetti aspect of celebration and party, but being made of trash, or turning to trash on the ground, sort of speaks to that as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, also this this notion that like a celebration or a festival or a true party is always like very close to the graveyard or something, you know, like there's always this kind of excess that and a risk that could potentially tip over into like a too muchness. And so there's a bit of danger there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, everything feels very, very tedious, kind of like about to tip over the edge into something horrifying, even though it appears to be a celebration. Without even getting into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'd love to talk about the language and the rhythm in each of your books. Kyra, yours is told in what reads to me like kind of short bursts of images and ideas. And Emily, your book slips in and out of poems and kind of has this beautiful formlessness within its structure that I find incredibly wonderful. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think about your own use of language and maybe even what your writing process is like.
Well, I sort of described my process a little bit, but yeah, I would say that this is Kyra, by the way, speaking right now. But I would say that, you know, these are very short stories that there's in single blocks of prose. So there's not like a lot of room to take a breath or come up for air. And they're quite densely packed with a lot of information. So a lot happens in a single sentence. And, you know, it's prose. I would more technically call it fiction, I guess. But it veers between being narrative and abstract, which can be an interesting process to move through as a reader, because you're sort of, you know, not always sure where you're going to land exactly. But which is why I felt like they needed to be really short, because they're quite lyrical and full of a lot of imagery, and in the way that the news can feel really dense too. But this is sort of much more colorful language than you would be reading in, you know, a journalistic text. So yeah, and in a lot of ways, the language is dictated for me by the words that I was using, that I had to work with. So it was an interesting experiment for sure.
You know, Confetti kind of, yes, slips into prose. There are like prose blocks, and then there are also like kind of quite small and discrete little poems as well. So I guess that, you know, I let the sort of materials that I'm talking about in the book dictate a lot of the language and the form. So things that are kind of very disposable and edible, like honey and sugar and weird like cakes and stuff, and then also like bodily fluids, and then also very high things like light from the sun and the screen, etc. So they sort of come apart and congeal in ways. And what the hell am I talking about? Yeah, oh, and the rhythm kind of flows from there. And then a huge dictator of, it's weird to use the word dictator actually when talking about a book of poems, but something that dictated the form and rhythm and language of the book was the sort of events of sunrise and sunset, which I'm sort of thinking of as the original beginning and ending. And so there's a kind of refrain that happens throughout the book about sunset and sunrise. So the book kind of keeps coming back to sunrise and sunset, and kind of looking for beginnings and ends, like firm points of rest or starting, and is sometimes able to find them and sometimes kind of slips away.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I think we'll do another short reading from each book. I'd love to hear a little bit about your influences and other works that you might see as in conversation with your books, or what you were reading when you were writing these. Yeah, just kind of what books are around.
So I mentioned Oulipo as being one of the influences. So Raymond Queneau is definitely, his book Exercises in Style, which essentially tells the same story over and over again, but in different ways. So it takes the same like simple action of an encounter on a bus and retells it a million different ways. So that was one book that was influential. I also, the work of Renee Gladman and Anne Carson, who both sort of, Anne Carson has that book, Autobiography of Red, which is like a novel in verse. So writers who have a way of telling a narrative, but doing it in an unusual way, using a different form that's almost more like poetry. Renee Gladman also does things like that. Again, sort of writers who deal with both narrative and the abstract. Italo Calvino is one of my favorite authors and has always been influential on lots of different things I've written. But I think the sort of fabulous, more vivid imagery was definitely in conversation with some of his work. And then just things like, I mentioned this in my acknowledgements a bit, but things like Picasso's Blue Period, where he did a whole body of work where there were paintings that were only using the color blue. So I looked at a lot of things that dealt with constraint in some way. But again, that's just the process of writing, where I think that, for instance, when you go to a museum and you see a painting on the wall or a sculpture, whatever it is, there's usually like a plaque that explains it, and there's people who look at the plaque before they look at the piece of art. But I've always felt like it needs to work without the plaque. So yes, this book is a lot about the constraint and the process behind it. But you can read the stories without knowing any of that, and there's still something to engage with, or at least I hope there is. So that was some of my thinking and some of the work that I was looking at and thinking about as I was writing this. So.
Yeah. I hope mine can work without the plaque too. That's the dream. A lot of my influences are sort of actually directly mentioned in the book, which I tend to do in my work. I like name people and books and stuff, but the movies that I'm writing about and with, which get mentioned at the end, and sometimes you can kind of tell, but again, it's like not important that what movie I'm sort of diagramming or talking about. Tend to be either horror movies, so like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Hellraiser 2 is in there, or like experimental films like Marguerite Duras movies, and like Antonioni's Zabriskie Point, which is that like wild movie set in the desert that like everyone hated, but now people seem to like again or something, in from 1970. And that movie actually I think originally gave me like the sort of idea for Confetti, because there's this like very tripped out scene at the end where a mansion in the desert explodes and you see like all of these products, like Wonder Bread and refrigerators, daily life stuff and products explode, and they look like confetti. And then also there are like movies that sort of combine those two things, like experimental stuff and the horror genre. So like Trouble Every Day, which is like that kind of artsy cannibal movie is in here, and also Bruno Dumont's 29 Palms, which is another kind of violent and also boring and interesting desert movie. So those were like threaded throughout and were hugely influential. And I tend to also like write with stuff on like this, like movies on and stuff. But then also I would say the people I mentioned throughout the book were the main influences. So like Simone Weil, George Bataille, who else is mentioned? Those are like the two main kind of spirits that haunt the book. And then also like there's a bit of Namjoon Paik's piece, The Moon is the Oldest TV, I was thinking of a lot and I mentioned in the book. So this idea of like planets or stars as like the sort of moving images before movies. And in terms of like living people, I feel like there's some influence or some kind of vibe similarity between this book and like something like Cynthia Cruz's poems. And also there's like an alchemical element. So maybe like Ariana Reins's Mercury there's a little bit of that in there. Cool. That's my attempt at answering the very good question you asked.
You did a good job.
Thank you.
So I'd love to hear just another snippet from each book before we say goodbye. We didn't discuss the order of this. So whoever, Emmalea, do you want to start, or Kyra, do you want to start? It doesn't, yeah.
Okay, so this is another one of my very short stories. It's called Today Clouds. Like other places, there are areas of fog and sometimes a little turmoil in the market. The buildings are old. Doors creak on their hinges. Accidents happen in the spring. Kings break their hips while elephant hunting, as fortunes spin from the wheels of young maidens. In the afternoon, two children play outside an abandoned house. Their dolls long decapitated. They arrange pieces of trash on the sidewalk, constructing their own tiny world on the ground. Its territories already mapped out by the fading chalk outlines of missing people. Here, a blank square of sidewalk becomes an open field, an empty pastry bag, a great white mansion. All is in miniature, inanimate specks fading into a voluminous backdrop of orange sky. The children drag sticks along the pavement, as if marching drones through the little town they've imagined, past the monuments of discarded bottles and shards of glass. They control everything, down to the weather, pouring water over the town for days of flooding, tilting magnifying glasses over rooftops to zap out unworthy citizens. Still in all, it has been a day for rookies, a day for running amok. Just off a main highway that stretches east of them and slices through a moonscape of craggy slopes, teenagers play with guns in the idle mountains, dropouts fulfilling a century-old dream of taking to the hills. Many of them live in the trailers dotting the hillside, where they spend their nights studying video game ninjas. Inside the abandoned house, a substitute teacher tries to adjust to daylight saving time. His kitchen is full of substitute ingredients: honey instead of sugar, water instead of milk, a single plank of wood where the bed should be, made for a man in place of another. He scrawls out a lesson plan for his next day of work, in which the few students he has left will be asked to contemplate one question: where does inspiration originate? The substitute looks up at the tiny cracks of light flickering like stars through the boards nailed over the windows. He remembers staring into a lamp store in Chinatown once a gallery of lights all blinking in dissonant rays of color. But here, there is nothing but scrub brush for miles into the distance, as if some enterprising tycoon has made off with the rest. The weather vane on the roof turns slowly on chicken feet as he peers through that same point of light in the window, thoughts shattered by the dropout boys shooting their guns into the air. A gust of wind blows a fleet of plastic bags past the house. Today, clouds, says one of the children outside, cueing the orchestra for the next great calamity.
Thank you.
I love that one.
Thanks.
I'm gonna read two poems, both called Honey and Tea. And there was honey in your reading, I believe.
There was a little honey. I thought of you.
Yeah, there's a lot of honey and other sticky materials and confetti. And this is also from the first section, called Light. Honey and tea. No souvenir. In France, California, Texas, or Pennsylvania. Ground emptied, honey and tea. Orange and pink Dunkin' Donuts sign falling fast with the sun, alongside the simple, exacting charm of a chest of drawers. IB, triviality of travel, of honey and tea. Northern city calling a gaze thither before disintegrating. If you only. I walk to the top of the hill while you sleep, honey and tea. Name the ambient violence that doesn't cut but makes a lozenge of what's in its air. Quiet fervency of a mouth, honey and tea, echo swoop mouthing, slid the northern lights and the sun echo. We two creatures in the bodega near the end. Do you see the horizon twinned in here's grayer air? Simone or Saturn, bottom of an atmosphere, abnegation, honey and tea unmusically, stirring spoon, scraping mug along the edges of a winter, almost dissolved, born. Honey and tea. Look what the body can do. Look what she does and be quiet. Then wrap her in gauze and send her, finished idling, to the place of rest where the world won't get eaten. There is only one fault, writes Simone, incapacity to feed upon light, to mistake hunger for beauty, but neither is distance, feed upon light and other goodnesses shoot through. Sidewalk eats dirty confetti, New Year's Day 2020. If smooth clumps of me come apart in hot water, easy honey and tea, I lose. The setting sun is beautiful because of loss, according to Antonin Artaud. To identify with the disintegration, to eat what's lit up, to abstain, to use the wide white screen as a frame, a container in which, to find romance in static, to decline gracefully, to stir a virtue, metallic and gelatinous. In Iceland, the ground was frost shriveled. Textures left and entered the landscape unholily. Where did the century go? Slid below a horizon again and again, then rose anaphora into bodies. Communion wafers dissolve on tongues as I cross myself as I eye someone a few pews over on an evening in the years between Icelands. Keeping rigorously to the point is a way to lie. To hear him shift his weight in a chair somewhere, honey and tea mumming an iteration of love repeated to excision, bliss, horizon. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There we go. Thank you both for sharing your work with us today. Today's guests, once again, were Emily Russo, author of Confetti, and Kyra Simone, author of Palace of Rubble. Both are out now, and you can order both books at skylitbooks.com. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.